We're continuing on here with Noi Mahoney and his weekly Borderlands column as he talks about some new developments this week. And the big one is a new development for the state of New Mexico. Noi is now an auto parts factory now comes to that state for the first time. And again, kind of highlighting how the Sun Belt in that area has really started to take off, including a lot of technology, obviously autonomous trucks making a big splash there as well. But now manufacturing is also headed to that state.
Yes, that's correct. Good morning. Really big news out of Mexico and a new chapter in the state's economy as New Mexico lands its first major auto parts manufacturing plant. Taiwan-based Hota Industrial Manufacturing recently announced they're going to build a $72 million plant in southern New Mexico. The plant, which will create 350 jobs, is going to be near the Santa Teresa port of entry, which is right on the U.S.-Mexico border.
And Noah, this is huge news. As someone that's lived in New Mexico before, we're looking at this development here. Does this leave the door open or just kind of open the door for others to follow suit to say, okay, maybe we can consider New Mexico as a really hot region to really start to ramp up?
Yeah, I believe so. I know we've talked about this on the show before that, New Mexico, they're in a really great spot geographically. They have a really, right now, they have a really proactive government that's really investing a lot of money in infrastructure, especially border infrastructure. So I think this could be the first of, maybe more announcements from manufacturers and automotive suppliers and technology companies that are looking to relocate or open new spaces, and New Mexico is in a prime spot.
I know this is kind of hard to prognosticate as you kind of look forward, but obviously looking along the borderland there between the United States and Mexico, you've got obviously lots of activity going on the Texas border, Laredo especially, and then of course you've got port activity there as well. The rails trying to move towards some maritime to try and move shipping up towards New Orleans there as well. But as you go westward, is this kind of a wave that's kind of moving in that direction, or is this just maybe just kind of like a flash in the pan that, again, as Anthony said, may get some momentum, but it's kind of working on its own?
I think this is part of a wave. It really remains to be seen how big the wave is, but it seems every week or at least several times a month I'm reading about new companies or companies that are expanding, and a lot of it is along, as you mentioned, the Southwest, Texas, moving westward, but we see it in the southeastern states too, Tennessee, Georgia. We're starting to see sort of the Sunbelt states and Southwest states really benefit from this nearshoring phenomenon, and as well as northern New Mexico and central Mexico. So it's really an interesting time to see, how the global economy and supply chains is sort of shifting a little bit, at least, towards more of North American real estate.
And Noah, keeping on that growth trend here overall, can you talk about another city that I'm familiar with, Mesa, Arizona, getting a new company or some expansion there?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question, Anthony? You cut out just a little bit.
Can you talk to us a little bit about Mesa, Arizona and the new growth that's being put out there?
Yeah, that's another interesting announcement that popped up last week. Nippon Express announced that they're building a 58,000 square foot warehouse facility aimed specifically at semiconductor chips, storage and logistics movements of semiconductor chips. And what's interesting about that is that has to be tied to an announcement that happened earlier this year. The Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, known as TSMC, is building a $40 billion semiconductor chip plant in Phoenix. That plant, the TSMC's semiconductor chip plant, is supposed to be operational by 2024. So, that Nippon Express's new industrial warehouse has to be aimed at that development, which is probably one of the biggest. The $40 million factory is probably one of the biggest things that's happened in, Arizona in decades.
Yeah, that's a huge deal. And also on a very fast timeline. If you're looking at superconductor facilities, that's extremely fast for one of those things to come up. Usually this takes at least 5 to 10 years for those things to create the clean activity, the clean environment that is necessary there as well. Moving to some not so good news, FedEx unfortunately closing a facility in Texas again. Probably to the detriment of the economy and what's been going on here lately. But what can you tell us about what they're doing out in the Lone Star State?
Yep. FedEx filed a what we call a warn notice here in Texas, with state officials, where they had to announce, or they announced they were laying off 58 employees and permanently closing a facility in Temple, Texas, Temple is in central Texas, just north of Austin. They didn't give a reason for this facility's closure, but it should be noted that the FedEx also recently announced they're closing facilities, in Georgia and I believe a few other states. And some analysts believe these closures are tied to, pandemic hiring. Maybe they hired, when there was a lot of freight moving during the pandemic or right after the pandemic, they really hired a lot of people. And so maybe this is part of shedding people now or eliminating jobs, unfortunately, as the freight economy has slowed, to where we currently are.
And Noah, you have one more story also up that's recently been put live, and that's out of San Diego, and really a pretty surprising bust that happened. Can you tell us about that one?
Yeah, that's a really unusual story. It occurred in as you mentioned, the San Diego, California border, a facility down there known as the Mesa port of entry, but U.S. Customs and Border agent named Leonard Darnell George was arrested last week on charges that he took bribes and conspired to help drug-fueled cars, or he helped allow drug-fueled cars to cross the border. These were not cars or automobiles, but these automobiles were filled with everything from methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine. So it was some really hard, dangerous drugs. Leonard Darnell George was arrested along with 6 other defendants. And for the bribery charges, he faces, 15 years to life. And for the conspiracy charges, they face possible life in prison. So it's pretty serious stuff.
Yeah, definitely there as well. And just get one little niche into American security and look at what can possibly happen there as well. Noi, thanks so much for joining us, and keep up the good work. We're looking for your column coming up next Monday as well.
Thank you so much.
Right now, we're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back with more Freight News Now.